So it's day 12, I think. I think it's Saturday, although the days all seem to be merging into one. What I do know is that we are camped near an old fort called Abu Jifan. And Philby came here 1917. It was the first water for over 200 kilometres from when he'd left the oasis of Al-Assa Hafuf, where we were what seems to be about 4 or 5 days ago. So he would have been mightily relieved to be here. We're now only 100 kilometres from Riyadh, our target, and Philby's target in 1917. So we push on tomorrow is the plan. Another 5:30 alarm. The sun comes up just before 6 o'clock. Right now the sun's been gone for, I think the sun set at 5, so it's now after 8 o'clock. So the sky is just another amazing canopy of stars. Mars has risen. Orion is up just behind me there. Jupiter is up in the sky. It's just a wonderfully calm night. The team are sitting under an acacia tree, which gave us a bit of shade when we arrived this afternoon with our camels, and it was great that Reem was the first Philby to ride camels into this old fort for 105 years. A very touching moment, and we relaxed under the shade of the acacia tree, and then when the sun started to go down about 4 o'clock, when the temperatures dropped, we walked down to the fort and tried to work out the position where Philby would have stood in 1917 when he took the photograph, the black and white photograph that we carry, and we're pretty sure we found that. Trees have grown since the time that he took it, but without doubt it's the exact place that he stood. So this morning was an early rise. It was windy. If you hear the podcast earlier that I tried to do with Reem whilst we were walking, even though we were cupping our hands around the microphone, it was almost impossible to avoid the wind. But we covered about 15 kilometres on foot before the camel team caught us up, and then we jumped on the camels and rode the last few kilometres into Abu Jifan. And I managed to get the drone up over the dunes first thing this morning, and some spectacular shots there. So I've been asked by our persuasive producers at Adventurous Audio to speak a little bit about what motivates me to do this kind of thing, and to talk about maybe how I kind of connect to Philby and what it all means to me. And I think if I where does it come from, what I do, because I've been doing expeditions for over 40 years of my life, and I think it essentially comes from a childhood growing up in rural Shropshire, and I just grew up being outdoors, very comfortable in my own company, very much enjoyed other people's company, but very comfortable equally on my own. And silence, I think. It's having a rural childhood, used to silence and quite comfortable in silence. And so, it's a lifetime of exploration, really, that was kick-started by a fantastic charity in the attic of the Royal Geographical Society in London, set up by a survivor of Scott's South Pole expedition, Murray Levick. And it was, when I went with them in 1979, called British Schools Exploring Society, and it still survives today. It's evolved and is doing fantastic work for young people in Britain, called British Exploring Society. And I went with them when I was 17, 18, never been to London, went for an interview on the train, ended up being offered a place on a 6-week expedition to North Norway, just north of the Arctic Circle, with 60 other people, one of whom I knew, my best friend Dowie, and shared a tent with 2 people I'd never met, grew up incredibly quickly undertaking scientific research in an extraordinary place where the sun didn't set for 6 weeks. And that really opened my eyes, and opened the eyes of a young lad who'd really set foot outside the Shire of Shropshire. And a bit like Frodo and Bilbo Baggins, really, and opened my eyes to a world of opportunity. And in my 20s, I just did not stop exploring, skiing across the Greenland ice cap, and there was a theme to these expeditions in that I tended to be attracted to following in the footsteps of extraordinary journeys, just trying to empathise with the amazing people that did these journeys. So one that springs to mind with my friend Nigel Harling is we skied across the Greenland ice cap following the footsteps of Fridtjof Nansen, using parachutes to haul us across from east to west. A fantastic journey. Then journeys into the Northwest Passage of Canada, involving twin otters, being surrounded by wolves, polar bears, in the footsteps of William Edward Parry, who nearly became the first person to find a way through the Northwest Passage in the 1820s, in charge of over 80 men, 2 ships, in his 20s. Amazing leadership. And foresight to avoid utter disaster. So from all of these old explorers, I learn a lot that enables me to move forward. And then I went back to the charity that gave me the opportunity as a young person, and I started leading expeditions for them off the north coast of Norway, much further north at Svalbard. And I spent 2 years of my life now living in a small tent on Svalbard, leading groups of young people, and that's really where I get my enjoyment today. I've done all in my younger days. I'm 61 now. In my younger days, I was, quite happy to carry a 40-kilo backpack. Well, I wouldn't say I was happy to carry a 40-kilo backpack, but I have carried 40-kilo generators on my back up and down mountains in Norway. But all that kind of macho stuff fizzled out pretty quickly, and there's much more to journeys for me today than that kind of stuff. It's all about being with inspiring people, but using journeys to inspire others. And the way that I was inspired, I struggled to find my way at school, but it was the outdoors that gave me a direction. And it was people that were prepared to go a little bit beyond, in the form of teachers who opened doors for me that really I wasn't mature enough to make the most of at the time in my life. So the Middle East has been a big chunk of my life, 25 years out here, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and the last 17, 18 in the beautiful country Oman. And I guess if there's a theme to a lot of the journeys I do in the Middle East, so 5-6 years ago we crossed the biggest sand desert on earth, 49 days from Salalah to Doha on foot and by camel, no tents, sleeping on the sand the way the old explorers did. And it, I've really locked my door in the Middle East. I really locked my car. People talk about freedom in the Middle East. I feel freer here than I do anywhere else in the world. For the last 3 or 4 days, over 200 kilometres, we've just driven wherever we want to, across flat plains, rocky terrain, sand, desert. I feel absolute freedom here that is very hard to replicate in other parts of the world. And so a theme to my journeys increasingly is trying to show the other side of Arabia beyond the headlines that tends to dominate, that the news and the media tends to focus on, because the people here are the kindest people you will ever meet. When we arrived at the fort this afternoon, we came across a couple who, insisted that we, join them for coffee and dates. Do you have food? Would you like to join us? The hospitality is incredible. I go home to Scotland and it's sort of nervous, twitching curtains and people not being quite so friendly. But here, the warmth and the openness of the hospitality is, I find very attractive. And I, to be honest, I have very little in common with Philby. I think, he's an absolute intellectual man on a plane way beyond me. But what we do share is just, we are both, when I read his books, the common ground between Philby and I is that we are both at peace, and we both find contentment in the desert. He used to plunge into all sorts of controversial stuff in more civilized surroundings, but in the desert he was his own man, and he did his own thing. That's what floats my boat, really. The simplicity of life in great company. The company, for example, of the 3 people I've been with for the last 12 days, just fantastic. So I feel completely comfortable out here. I feel very uncomfortable in noisy, crowded places. And this is where I find that contentment. What do I admire about Philby? Just that he's a man of absolute conviction and principle. Yes, he irritated the heck out of his own government, but thank goodness for people that stand up for things that aren't quite right and object, even at the cost to their own careers, perhaps. And, not many people have the conviction to do that these days. And I do wonder what Philby would be doing if he were around today, because all this greenwashing and political speak was certainly not for him. And I'm sure he would be plunging into more controversy. But I really do admire someone who is prepared to upset the status quo and just speak out when things are not right. And he was a man of principle, and a lot of people say he must have died a wealthy man. He was the confidant of the king, one of the wealthiest people in the world when he was alive, for over 43 years really. And he helped negotiate the biggest oil deal in the history of the planet when Saudi sold its concession, not to the British, but to the Americans via Aramco, what is now Aramco. But you know what? Philby died a poor man, and the reason he died a poor man, despite the king offering him all sorts of rewards to thank him for his friendship and his counsel, Philby said, no, if I take that from you, Your Royal Highness, then I can never challenge you. I can never question what you say. So someone who puts those principles before money, stands very high in my regard. I think another thing that I enjoy from expeditions is the people as much as the place. And Thesiger wrote about the people of the desert being as important as the place, because without them the experience would have been quite hollow and shallow. And in my job in Oman, I run a not-for-profit organisation called Outward Bound, and the motivation in Outward Bound is not money; it's mission-driven, because we believe that we make a difference to people's lives, and we've used the desert, the fireplace of the desert around which we've warmed our toes and our fingers for the last 12 nights, is the oldest university on earth. Forget about Salamanca and Oxford and all these places. The oldest university on earth is the fireplace, because around the fire of the desert people have sat and discussed and resolved issues and challenges for thousands of years. And we've used that place of learning really as a catalyst to inspire future leaders, young leaders, people of the future who can help try and address these polarizations, this polarization of cultures and these misunderstandings between East and West, the Arab world and the Western world, however you want to define it. And a simple program that I launched many years ago at the British Museum in London went on to become recognized by UNESCO as one of the world's leading civil society initiatives. And it was based around that concept of learning from each other around the fire with no distractions, no mobile phones. So for many years in Oman, I've been taking groups on 5-day expeditions into the sands with camels, walking, talking, discussing issues. What are the causes of and solutions to extremism? What is the role of the media? What are the solutions? That's important. It's so easy to be critical and negative, but we have to come up with solutions. And tomorrow night for me is the most important night of the expedition, because we're going to be joined by young people from 2 schools in Riyadh, the British International School in Riyadh and MISC School, some Saudi Arabian students from MISC schools. They'll be joining us at the University of the Desert tomorrow night around the fireplace. So I'm looking forward to talking to them. But on our 5-day courses, I often refer to someone who inspires me really. And you've achieved something in your life when there's 3 statues of you plonked in various parts of the world. And an Irishman called Edmund Burke was considered many centuries ago as being a bit of a radical, but he was such a great thinker. And I believe this quote that he came out with is, for me, sums up the need for people like me, I guess in my own humble way, to step up and make a difference. It's so easy to be comfortable and do nothing. But Edmund Burke's quote is that all that is needed for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing. And that's my challenge to these young people at the end of our 5 days in the desert. And that's kind of my inner challenge to myself. I'm not the kind of person who can just sit around and do nothing. I want to try and contribute in some way to make a difference. And in I've been surrounded by inspiring people for a big chunk of my life. Expeditions introduce you to inspiring people. I'm traveling with 3 inspiring people. You know, when you're leading an expedition like I am now, you're essentially the CEO of a small SME, not for profit. You know, it's not driven by money, it's driven by mission. You know, I have to fundraise, I have to manage a budget, have logistics to consider. We've got a mission, we've got a direction, we've got external communications, we've got internal communications. I've got to build a team, I've got to choose the right people. And on this trip, I you know, I know that I've chosen 3 fantastic people to share this journey with, and it gives me great enjoyment to use this journey to give them all a bit of a platform in their lives. You know, yesterday I posted some photographs that Anna Maria, our photographer, took, and because we had a brief signal, we were in sight of a road, and I made a list of the feedback I got from about 8 people instantly. Stunning, terrific, magical, incredible, fantastic. You know, Anna Maria is a fantastic photographer, and I hope this expedition she will use. She's sponsored by Leica, which is the top, the Rolls Royce of the camera world, and I hope that she will use this as a platform to go on and achieve greater things in her life. You know, the guy who's looked after all of our logistics and our route finding, one of the most humble people you'll ever find, Alan Morrissey, brilliant, and I hope this will in some way give Alan the satisfaction that it's given me, because I know he, like me, enjoys the desert very, very much. And you know, I've got incredible pride in watching Reem, because it's Reem's grandfather that we're following, and just watching her be reconnected to her family. Not reconnected because she's never lost that connection, but she perhaps never knew too much about her grandfather. And it's been lovely to watch that, her own pride in when we've arrived in places where her grandfather would have been 105 years ago, and that's been fantastic for me to see. So I get huge satisfaction, not just from walking from A to B. That's not the point. It's the journey and the people that you share it with, and the stories that you tell and you hear, and the lives that you help shape. And you know, we need more Edmund Burkes. We need more good people to stand up and do something, really, because it's so easy when you have a full belly and you're warm to do nothing. But society goes nowhere if that's the case. You know, I'm inspired. There's a wonderful group I've watched emerge in Inverness. I live in a little village called Bewley, a voluntary organisation called Aban, doing great work with young people around the Inverness area, introducing them to the outdoors and the value of outdoor learning. So, you know, that's a little bit about me and what inspires me to do what I do. I think I may have mentioned that I don't sleep in a tent, and the next thing I'm going to do, because I'm pretty smelly actually. I'm just looking at my watch here. I've done over about 30,000 steps today, so I'm pretty pooped. We've had lunch. I'm going to get a little bit of water. We don't have too much water, but we've only got 2 days left now. Tomorrow night is our final camp, so I'm going to do my best to get a bit of the sweat off my body and just get into my sleeping bag, put my head back on the jacket that I use as a pillow, and just look at the amazing night sky above me. We've already seen 2 or 3 meteors scuttling across, so hopefully another entertaining night under the stars of Arabia awaits.